Conversations with the Citizen.
This is Conversations with the Citizen. I'm your host, Tia Carroll Jones. I'm here today with Tyronne Stoudemire. Welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, Tyronne Stoudemire. I'm Senior Vice President of Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Hyatt Hotels Corporation. I'm also the new author of, not an author to my title, of Diversity Done Right, Navigate Through Cultural Differences in the Workplace and Beyond.
So, as you said, you are the Senior Vice President of Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Hyatt. How did you come to do DEI work?
I went kicking and screaming. Didn't want to do it. I started my professional career at a company called Hyatt Associates. It was based in Lincolnshire, Illinois. It was an HR outsourcing consulting firm. Was working in operations running call centers. It was 70% of our revenue came from HR outsourcing. So benefits administration, record keeping, 401k, pension plans. And I've been working about 10 years, and I was one of 5 black leaders that they brought in from the outside. Typically, historically, they promoted people up from the bottom to up the organization. They never hired people from outside, especially anybody of color. And I was doing the work. It was a woman by the name of Juanita Robinson Brown, who was in technology and training technologists, came to me and said, "Hey, my brother, you need to get more involved. Our black colleagues need to see you. You're not connecting in." And my orientation, the conversation with my parents around the dinner table was: go to work hard, trust your employers going to do right by you. Never associate yourself with more than one with your own kind, because they're going to think you're trying to overthrow the government or incite a riot. So keep yourself, do your job. That was what I was told. And so she said, "But you got to be seen, you got to be a part of it." We were just about to do our Black History program. She says, "You need to come and talk to the black colleagues," because I was the highest ranking black at the time in the organization. So, "Well, come get me." And she did, and we went down into the basement, down this corridor, down the hall. The light was out. I said, "Where's she leading me to?" We go into the room, and they were celebrating Black History. So there was fried chicken, orange pop, watermelon, and dancing. And I was like, "Oh, heck no, we're going to celebrate that." I said, "This is what you brought me to." And so I shared with them and talked to them, "Listen, if we want people to really understand who we are in our cultures, we need to give them a true cultural experience. We are far beyond a little ethnic food, a little ethnic garb, Taco Tuesday, Fried Rice Friday, and Soul Food Sunday. We have a culture that we need to share and expose them to do the work." So one of the ladies, being smart, she says, "Oh, well, you do it then. You know everything. You do it." I says, "Okay, I will," right? So we put together a program. We then reached out to our colleagues and said, if anyone is a singer or a musician, join us, because we created what we call a Hyatt culture, a Hyatt chorus. And we had violin players and trumpet players. We had a full, orchestra and choir members. And because I feel that if, we can go to sports, baseball games, football games, basketball games, and concerts, if we can create that environment, we would be more inclusive as an organization. And so we put the program on, and so the same lady that pushed back about it, she says, "Listen, we can't have an all Black History program with an all-white choir." And my response was, "Sure you can, because somebody's going to volunteer after working 8, 9, 10 hours a day, right, and come and then sing, rehearse gospel numbers and Negro spirituals and anthems and hymns. They're all right with me, and they're going to sing it in front of their peers, in front of the public. I think we'll be okay." So we put the program on. We invited Ruby Bridges to be our keynote speaker. We turned our cafeteria into a theater with like 875 seats. And the program was successful. It was really nice. And the CEO gets up and he says, "Whoever put this program on needs to be part of my executive committee." And I said, "Oh, is that easy to get to the C-suite? I should did this a long time ago," right? That's my orientation. I grew up in church. I was a background singer for many years. And so music was my thing. And we scheduled to have lunch with him, and we were talking. He was like, "Look, I got this thing called diversity." I said, "What thing?" He says, "Well, we got to do this, and I think that you're the right person for this job." I actually told him no. Because, again, there was not a lot of people that looked like me in the organization, and certainly not the leadership. I was always taught that you don't really want to get into that type of work because in HR, because it's not non-revenue generating, that when times got bad, you'll be the first to go. And there was no true commitment. And I did not want to be the poster child for Build a Better Negro program for Hyatt. It was just my 2 cents. I went and I talked to some of my mentors and sponsors, John Rogers, Melanie Hobson, Bishop Arthur Brazier, and to just really sort out that I make the right decision, because you never tell a CEO no. And when I told him no, he says, "Listen, I'm going to reserve the right to come back because I think you're the right person for this work." Another reason why I tried to turn them down, because they didn't even think that I was black. They thought I was from India. They didn't even think, or Middle East. They didn't even classify me as being black. And so he came back, and I was more prepared because I had conversations with my mentors. And he said, "We want you to do it. We can't take no for an answer. Do the job for 2 years, and if it doesn't work, we'll put you back in the business." And I said, "Well, I got a couple of requests," right? He said, "So what is that?" I said, "Well, we need a budget. We need resources." He said, "Well, how much do you need?" Now he's getting short and aggravated with me because I'm now challenging him on this particular job that nobody knew about, right? He said, "What do you need?" And I literally made the number up. I said, $2.8 million. I was trying to reconcile an invoice for a customer. That number was in my head. He says, "Okay, you got it." I said, "So the other thing is that we need a sponsor. If you sponsor this work, we can get it done because they're not going to listen to me, but they'll listen to you." He says, "Well, okay, that's good. What else you got? I got to go." And I says, "Well, I was taught never to find myself in a non-revenue generating role. That if we could turn this to a consulting practice for our existing customers, and we say we're the world's largest HR outsourcing consulting firm, that if we had issues, certainly they had issues as well. So we can use our existing client base to have conversations about solutions to build a more diverse workforce." He said, "Okay, you got it." Literally within 8 months of doing the work, we generated more than $4 million in revenue. So the 2.8 that he gave, we doubled that. So there was the interest that was there. So I began to do the work and get into the work and study and worked along with the chief diversity officer at the time was Andreas Tapias. He was in learning development. I was on the operations, so I could operationalize the diversity strategy because this is a strategy. You got to have a strategy. It's just not a nice thing to do. There's money to be made and money to be lost. So that was my entree into it. We had 3 goals. 1, that we would double representation of women around the globe. 2, that we would attract a certain type of investor. And 3, that we would gain the market share in diversity. And again, within that first year, we hit it all. Our number 1 stockholder at that time was Ariel Investments with John Rogers and Melanie Hobson, who was our number 1 stockholder. So the headlines: world's largest HR consulting firm based in Lincoln, Illinois, next to Lake Forest, one of the most prestigious communities in the country. Number 1 stockholder is a black firm. Unheard of. So that was life-changing for Hyatt during that time. So I went kicking, screaming, saying no, not knowing what I was getting into, because the examples that I saw in the news, what I saw in the papers and social media was that very negative. It wasn't positive at all. So I had to turn a negative into a positive, take lemons and make lemonade, and I've been doing this work for 30 years.
Your book, Diversity Done Right, was released in April. Why did you want to write that book?
Again, when Wiley's book publishing came out to talk to me, I told him no. I didn't have time. I was busy. I needed to. I just didn't feel that I was a writer. But I had been collecting stories. I had been doing my journal. When I would do speeches, I was sharing my experience. So he says, "Well, just sit down and just." I told him no. He called back and said, "We need to do this. You got a great story. We're following you on social media. You got 23,000 people following you. You say boo and people all respond." He said, "You should really write this book." He says, "Do me a favor, just write, a summary and a few chapters and come back." So I did the overview. I did 3 chapters. Is this exactly what we need? And we began to do it. So again, I didn't know enough about it. Didn't know what I didn't know. But other people have seen things in me that I couldn't see myself that has pushed me forward. It just happened to have been white men. They both were white men.
From your experience, what is the right way to do diversity in the workplace, and what is the wrong way?
I think that the word diversity itself is polarizing, right? People, you say it, if you ever want to end a meeting early, bring up the word diversity. People will scatter like roaches. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to offend. They don't want to appear to be dumb or ignorant, so they tend to avoid the word. Diversity is the mix of difference. Inclusion's making that mix work, and equity is the goal. When we look at our history and we look at where blacks have been held back, or Asians, Latinos, anyone that's come to this country from another country was at point of them. And those thems were not treated appropriately, right? So I think it's important that we understand that penalizing people, creating polarization that we can suss is not the right way to go. Canceling culture is not the right way to go. I think that we have to listen to understand. We have to seek to understand other cultures. We have to share. We have to have courageous conversations. The work that you're doing here at Citizens is critical to society, to our world's success. We've got to write the narrative. We've got to right the wrongs. We've got to tell our stories. If we don't write the narratives, others will write them for us, and it will be wrong. For example, when there was a war, World War I, World War II, the people that wrote the narrative was the people who won. But the story wasn't always right. It wasn't always told right. So I think it's important that we share. It is the power of our worldviews that shapes our beliefs and our behaviors and how we make decisions and resolve conflicts. The more I know about you, the better off I am, and the better off we both are. But I got to start with understanding myself first. Where did I come from? You know, what messages did my parents give me that I share with my daughter, and she will share with her children, and so forth and so on, and not to be afraid or ashamed of those. I recently did a session at the Human Rights, Civil Rights Museum, and as I looked around the museum, there were more whites and more people from outside the United States than there were blacks. Now I began to look at that, is that sometimes our culture and our history is so very bad until we want to, it hurts to gotta go back. See that how our ancestors were treated and hung from trees and, you know, run over by cars and drug in the middle of the streets. That's hard for anybody to take, right? And so when I say all that to say is that we just gotta really understand and lean into each other's cultures. We have to understand, we have to accept it, and we have to move forward. I wasn't a slave, neither was white people that I know in my work or my community were slave masters, but they benefited from slavery, we didn't, right? I was again at a session the other day, and a man comes up and says, this question is for Tyronne. He says, if black folks don't think black lives matter in this country, why don't they just go back to Africa? Well, my response was, you can't return stolen merchandise. There's no policy for return merchandise. Blacks did not ask to come here. They did not flee to come here on their own like other cultures did. We were kidnapped, hoodwinked, bamboozled, and thrown over into the ocean. And so by show of hands, how many of you white people would trade places with black folks? And not one raised their hand. That tells me you have the capacity to understand that it ain't a good thing to be black. So what are you going to do about it? Right? We all have privileges, but white privilege is really, it's quite different. You may not own a slave, but you sure benefited from that. Right? When you have, you know, whites only, white applies only, all those things are things that put us back. Redlining in Chicago where blacks couldn't buy, you know, homes in certain areas. And I remember, you know, was going to sell a home, and the realtor said, take down anything that symbols black because white people wouldn't buy it. How insulting is that, to take my family pictures off the wall, or take art pieces that I've gotten from history to put away that somebody white may buy my home? White folks wouldn't do that. They wouldn't put up with it, wouldn't stand it. So again, when you talk about this, it's kind of righting the wrong. It's kind of leaning into culture without the bias, without the stereotypes. But without courageous conversations, this is not going to happen. Without me trying to listen to respond versus listening to understand, we're not going to close this gap. But in this country, for us, we admire race. We talk about it, but we never have any end solution on what it is. And one of the fastest growing demographics are multicultural households. I have a 22-year-old daughter just graduated from Hampton University, and we have more black and brown men in prison than you do in high school, and than you do in college. So the odds of her marrying in our culture and within her and a male versus a female is high. I've got to be comfortable enough that she comes home and says, you know what, I fall in love with a woman, or I fall in love with an Asian guy, or I fall in love with a white guy. If I want to keep my relationship, I've got to be open to that, right? So I think the more we understand and the more we stop polarizing each other, but we see it in our federal government every day. Just the other day with the two congresswomen, there was body shaming. One tried to body shame the other, but she responded in a way that nobody thought that she would. She wasn't judgmental. She wasn't attacking the other person. She just asked a simple question. If the rule says this, and if I did that, what would happen? You're going to see more of that from this next generation. I think the 6 generations in the workforce, the first time in our history, we got 6 generations in the workforce. My generation, until then, the baby boomers taught to fit in, to get along, to assimilate. This next generation, they ain't assimilating and fitting in nowhere. It's about how I add value, and you're going to pay me for the value that I add. And if you don't, I'm going to do my own business. So those are the things that are going to be more complicated, is that if we don't understand generationally how we're going to move them and gain the market share, we're going to lose. For example, I look at diversity with workforce, the workplace, the marketplace. The workforce is where the talent's coming from. So when you look at the demographics, look at the available labor market within globally, 70% of the global market is black and brown people, right? In this country, in 2025, the majority of the baby boomers will be eligible for retirement. That's 80 million people. Now, whether they retire or not is still left up to the economics of their households. But the next generation of workers is only 40 million. So there's a shortfall of 40 million qualified workers. By 2025, the heterosexual white male will be a minority. The game is changing. It's changing right in front of our eyes, but there's populations of people that will fight against that. that will try to stop that, because it's about power, it's about control. So if I can control, I keep the power.
How can companies not only make sure they're not tokenizing their diverse workers, but are also retaining them?
That's going to be a big challenge. I think the death, murder, George Floyd showed this nation and around the globe the disconnect between blacks and whites, and how marginalized blacks have been for centuries, and how far behind blacks are. Companies either reacted to the death and murder of George Floyd, or companies responded to the death and murder of George Floyd. Those who reacted over-indexed with, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and did nothing. Many hired people in their corporations, and they made the assumption or the stereotype that black people could lead diversity. So they put black people where they had the experience and not into the job. These were smart, bright, intelligent, educated, well-spoken individuals who were put into a job that required, number one requirement was influence, right? And many were not successful because they couldn't influence people who didn't really want to do the work in the beginning. Right. People who felt that if I do this, I have to give something up. So most companies have backed off of what they're doing. So I want to celebrate Hyatt, and part of because what I lead is that we made a commitment that we would double representation of women around the globe with a focus on people of color, to focus on opportunity youth between the ages 16 and 24. Our program is called Rise High. The qualifications is unemployment and no education. We've committed to hire 10,000 globally by 2025, and that will increase our black suppliers. In each category, we have exceeded the goal before 2025. We've promoted more than 400 women into senior, and these are senior level roles, because corporations will find entry level to mid manager. What they say they can't find is the VP plus. The general managers, and they're there, but you have to find them. So over 400 women that we promoted, 38% of our hires to date are black and African Americans in that category of Rise High. We've added over 700 new black vendors, which is huge, right? And so all of this is part of our year report. I'm not stating anything that's confidential. You can go out and find it. This is now 3 years of active work. So that to me is success. So it isn't that you can't find them. They're right in front of you in most cases. You've overlooked them for various reasons, which is really the biases in the systems. We have to understand that systems were created and designed for white men by white men. But as the world continues to diversify, right, those systems have to be broken down to meet the needs. It's a difference between equity versus equality. Equality is that we give everybody the same thing. I use the illustration of a family of 4 going out for a bicycle ride. The 5-year-old can't get on the seat, nor can he touch the pedals. His mother's riding comfortably, but she's concerned about the safe and well-being of her son in front of her. And when she looks back, her husband is 6'5", his knees are hitting the handlebars, he's bent over, he's uncomfortable. And by the way, he did not want to go on the ride in the first place. And then her daughter is in a wheelchair, can't even get on the bike. But I gave them all the same thing, right? We posted the job, anybody can apply. But in all due respect, you already identified the person before you even posted the job. But then equity is giving everybody the bike that fits them. Corporations do a fair to good job on training people on how to do the work. Where we fail is how to treat one another. So be a part of a company that purpose is to care for people to be at its best, and diversity, equity, and inclusion is the manifestation of that purpose, care really comes alive, right? And so when you look at that, black vendors have an example we can share. We have an African American female out of Baltimore that sells bamboo toilet paper. For those of you who are listening, go out, it's called Laura Tush. The toilet paper is so good until our guests are still in it off the carts in the hotel. Wow. Right? We gave her the hotel, we gave her a 2-year contract. It was going to give her the region. She says, but I can't afford to do it. I don't have the capital to do it. We paid her a year in advance. Okay. Right, so now she has enough capital to do other things. Now, I'm not suggesting we have to do that with everybody. That was a situation that we chose to do then. A hotel in Atlanta, which is Hotel of Hope, that was named Hotel of Hope by MLK. During this height of civil rights movement, when Martin Luther King was attempting to have a combined lunch with the blacks and whites downtown Atlanta, they were treated like mud. They treated really, really bad. And Martin Luther King, as Lily Clayton said to the general managers, you act like you don't want us here. Why are you treating us so bad? He says, we don't want you here, we want you to leave. Mm-hmm. They kicked them out of the hotel. When they came out of the hotel, they were digging the hole for Hyatt. And Martin Luther King says, I hope the hotel does right by us, and Hyatt did. We're the first hotel high-rise downtown Atlanta, the first hotel with revolving restaurant, the first hotel with glass elevators, and the first hotel to hire blacks into management. Right? So that has been a part of Hyatt's legacy since the 60s, to the height of the civil rights. So moving to doubling representation, looking at opportunity youth, and looking at suppliers really was just an extension to the work that we've been doing for 60 years, more than 60 years. But corporations who don't get it, don't understand it, will make major, and listen, we got work to do. Don't let me try to apply that we're there. We still have work to do, but we have the commitment from the top and the bottom of the organization. But I give a couple examples, and this is all in my book, so I'm giving short clips of my book. Buy the book, you'll read more. But when you look at the diversity in the work in the marketplace, for example, McDonald's is one of the most celebrated companies for DEI globally. They do a lot of great work, a lot of things in the communities, but yet when they went to India years ago, the first McDonald's in India was burned down to the ground, $100 million lawsuit. Now the cow is sacred. They didn't sell beef, they didn't sell chicken, they sold fish and chicken, but they fried their French fries in animal oil and lied about it. So to regain the trust of that community, they had to lean into the family. So if you Google McDonald's in India, it'll say McDonald's a family restaurant. That logo exists no place else in the world, right? So in China, you will have couples that will get married in McDonald's because of the clean water, the clean the food, the atmosphere, the pictures. They get married in McDonald's and KFC. Now let me be very clear. I could never convince my wife to get married to McDonald's or KFC, right? So that worked. Chevy Nova. In the 70s, a Nova car was the hit. Everybody wanted a Chevy. Everybody wanted a Nova. But when they went to Spain, it fell flat because Nova means won't go. Who buys a car doesn't go. So not understanding the cultural context, there is money to be lost or money to be made. Goober Foods, when they went to Africa and to Japan, the consumer was horrified with the packaging. The pretty blue-eyed baby, the fuzzy hair, everybody in the States, we loved it. I submitted my daughter's picture to see if she would be on the Goober package. And their interpretation was, we don't eat our young. What's on the box is what's in the box. Those mean, ugly Americans chopped up their babies and put them inside the box. So those are the things we have to understand, is that we're similar, we are different, but our different lives and our cultural backgrounds. The messages that your mother taught you may be very different than what my mother taught me, but how we make decisions are based upon those worldviews. So if I'm limited and I don't go outside my city blocks, we got people here in Chicago that never leave the south side to go downtown. You got people that's downtown will never go to the west or south side of Chicago, so they're limited to what their worldview could be. So that's why I believe traveling and experiencing things will broaden your worldview. And on the downside, it was the 18 attorneys that came from Russia to study Jim Crow and slavery to justify killing Jews. So again, if we don't mind our history, it will repeat itself. That's why it's important, and I commend you for what you're doing with radio and with print. We've got to continue to tell these stories. We've got to continue to share, because sometimes we'll minimize our own culture. One of my biggest fears and concern about the Black culture is that we don't understand our self-worth. And we minimize ourselves because someone has told us that we're less than. I don't like the word minority because it's a mathematical equation that means less than. I'm not less than anybody, right? I can conquer as much as you can or more in some cases. So we have to rewrite the narrative, we have to change the narrative, and I talk about that in the book, but I think that we really need to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind. We've got to lift as we climb, we've got to leave the door open and the light on for others to follow through.
Why do you think diversity, equity, and inclusion are under attack?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion is clearly under attack, and we are in a crisis. Because when the majority feel that they're losing something, then the defenses rises. We have to show that the data is important, because in most cases, most organizations are still promoting and hiring white men at a much faster rate than that of women and people of color. Black women hold more degrees than any other demographic in the world, but yet not sit sometime in senior level roles. Out of Fortune 500 companies, I think we only have maybe 2 Black women leading those companies, but yet they're sometimes the most educated, the most experienced, but there's a stereotype that prohibits them from moving forward. I think it's fear-based, and I think that if I give something up, I've got to give something up for you to win, and I'm not willing to do that. So I think those things are being under attack. When you look at the demographics and the data on anything that relates to that we're tracking. Blacks are at the bottom of those total, whether it's housing, education. Well, not education as much because of the influx of black women, but you look at healthcare, you look at jobs, you look at housing, you look at different things, credit scores, and all those different things. We tend to fall at the bottom. We've got to have some type of disruption to move us forward, and I don't think that our white counterparts are equally willing to do that. For example, Asians were never given loans to do businesses in suburbs. They wouldn't give them loans because they didn't want to sell their Asians to get rich off of from their own people. So the banks allowed giving them loans to do businesses in the black community, and wouldn't give the black people loans to do business in their own community. Those types of things have to be, torn down and disruptive and rewritten so that we can spend our money. The black dollar doesn't stay in the community after one transaction. We need to go to the suburbs or buy from someone else because we were trained that way. We were given those experiences, right? But we've got to learn how to support our own, and blackness is important. But those policies have been put in place that prohibit us from moving forward. They were done for a reason, and those things are now changing, and people are fearful of that. So it's coming under attack because they feel like I have to give up something for you to get something. My children and my children's children will suffer if I don't do something to prevent that from happening now. We look at it in reverse. If I don't do something now, my children's children will not benefit a great deal. It is the baby boomer generation that has to slay those giants, so the next generation doesn't have to pick those things up to move forward. But they're not going to tolerate it because I was told to fit in and assimilate. They were taught, look, if I don't add value here, I'll add value someplace else. If I add someplace else, I'll do my own. I shared a story I shared earlier today. A dear friend of mine and a young lady I've been mentoring went to lab school, graduated with honors, went on to Notre Dame, graduated with honors, did everything that was required of her, went to the corporate America. She's a biracial child. Her mother's white, her father's black. Worked very hard, but couldn't get ahead because people saw her as a threat. People saw her as she had ideas and she would see things they couldn't see, and she got sick of it and ultimately started her own business. She has a candle shop over on Polk Street. You all stop by and support her. Okay. That's what you're going to see, is that this next generation is going to find out ways. If I'm going to work that hard for this company, I'm working that hard for myself and start my own business. We have to support them. We have to support them.
What are some key takeaways from the book that you want readers to have?
That's a great question. One of the takeaways, I really people understand that diversity is not a bad thing. Diversity without inclusion leads to confusion. The goal is equity, that we're meeting people that are, giving them the right tools to be successful. Having people to understand that we all have a story to tell. Do not be ashamed of that story. Tell your story. Write your story. Share with others. Be open, be honest. I tell that people at the end of my speeches, in a world that we can be anything we want to be kind to yourself and be kind to others. I think because when we get each of us have been given 24 hours a day to do what we will. We can do something good or do nothing at all. Because when tomorrow comes, yesterday is gone. So what are you going to do in this 24 hours to make sure that the world is a better place to work and live for everyone? We didn't get here by ourselves. We're not going to resolve this by ourselves. This is not a destination, it is a journey. So understanding the journey, where we came from, understand where we're trying to go, and understand what the delta between the two will be, and solve for those issues.
Okay. Sorry. Where can people go to find out more about you and your book?
You can buy my book at any local bookstore, and I do want you to support the small black-owned bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. The book came out in May. No, it came out in April. From April until May, it was #1 bestseller, #1 new release, #1 HR book, #1 diversity book, and #3 social psychology. I've gotten great reviews on the book. I want to be able to tell people, I think that you'll see yourself in this book because I tell stories about being pulled over by the police driving while black. I talk about home ownership. I talk about, finance. I talk about just being the only black in the room. It is exhausting being the only black. If black people are experiencing the workforce now, black fatigue, exhausted, because now I got to do my job, then I've got to explain to my white folks what it means to be black, and I've got to work twice as hard as my white counterparts. It's exhausting. I've got to do, although I'm a senior executive of a major multi-million-dollar company, and I get much respect inside the corporation, but when I go outside the corporation and drive my car, I lay prey to the police officer who pull me over and say, whose car are you driving? How long are you going to be here? Right? I may not make it home. Right, and so those are the things that I think that I talk about in the book. That what are some of the solutions? How do you navigate through those things? How do you put things in place that you can just get home safe? How to work through the systems when people say you're not doing your job. You know, what to say to people who might say that I just don't like you. Right, how do you respond to some of those things without joy? And I remember one time I was with a leader and he was just yelling and screaming and screaming. And another friend of mine had told me one time that said, you know, why are you yelling at me? And it brings them down. Lowered my voice. I got closer. Why are you yelling at me? It makes a difference. I think that people don't go home and lay down and wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to discriminate against 2 women, 3 Asians, 4 blacks, and a few good white men. But I do believe they're bad and good actors in any organization. But I do believe also there's triggers that would trigger people to behave differently. And so understanding it's not always about race, but it is, right? But then we have to figure out how do we overcome those issues to bring people aware. I think if the adults have the aha moment, you give them feedback. The goal is to self-correct, influence others, influence systems. The systems are flawed and other people don't know what they don't know. When the man asked me about going back to Africa, he had a genuine question. There was a black woman that says, but Tyronne, you know, I don't know why you preaching this diversity, and I never been in for many diversity programs, and my great-great-grandfather was a slave. They didn't have no programs for him. Did you ever read about Harriet Tubman? She was the first chief diversity officer. She had the first diversity program moving slaves from the South to the North of freedom. Rosa Parks, MLK, Jesse Jackson, John Lewis, Enola Clayton, the list goes on and on and on, right, of people who committed their lives to making sure that we could vote, that we could have jobs, that we would have food, that we would have shelter. Those are all programs to close the gap. Diversity is just a word that's put in front of it because of the differences. So this is not easy work. It's complicated work. It's constantly influencing others. Through my professional career of 30 years, every time I opened my mouth, I knew I was taking a chance that I might not have a job. But at a certain point in your lives, if you don't have, John Rogers and Melanie Hobson always encourage me, take the risk. It's worth it. We will take care. We will have your back. Push the envelope. Get people to see what they can't see. But you have to do it in a very dignified way. But I honestly believe that we wouldn't be where we are today if it had not been for social media and for what we're doing right here today. These things are being uncovered. People don't have responses. People are shocked at what's going on. People are saying things. I am also an adjunct lecturer at Kellogg, and I did a session with some students one time. And we went downtown Chicago. I gave a black guy sunglasses and a cane, and a white guy sunglasses and a cane. And I write about this in the book. And I had them to walk down Michigan Avenue and ask for assistance. Hand over fist, when the white guy asked for support and assistance, he got it. When the black guy did it, they pushed him away. They thought he was trying to do something. It was just night and day, literally, right? The class was overwhelmed, didn't believe that was the case. And people say it's not about race, but that was about race. What you saw was color. And I should share another story, a positive story that I think the next generation or generation after that, a friend of mine was going to get a car. And his daughter was going to get a car, and his granddaughter asked the parents, what color car are you going to get? And the parents said black. And the young lady says, but daddy and mommy, black is not a color, it's a culture. That's hope, right? We have our culture, we should be proud of our culture, we should share our culture. And I think one of the top 10 competencies required to do business in the global economy is cross-cultural competence. We define cross-cultural competence as the ability to discern and take into account one own and other worldviews to be able to seize problems and resolve conflicts in ways that maximize cultural differences with empathy and with care to outperform the competition. So again, looking at that and understanding, I've got to really know who I am and what shapes my worldview. I've got to know who you are, and from your perspective, not my perspective. Most of our white counterparts living in suburban Illinois have a negative impression about who we are because of what they see on the news or experience that they may have had that ultimately they created. And another situation where a woman asked me, well, what role did white women have in slavery? White women had a big role in slavery. Many white women inherit slaves from their fathers who passed away. And marriages wasn't because I love you, marriages was because of economics. You have more families coming together to share that wealth. And oftentimes there's a big dispute about good morning versus good morning, where white women would tell to the black women after selling their children off in the night and hanging their husbands and their sons, good morning, you're mourning your loss of your loved ones. Good morning came out of India way back in the 18th centuries. Really is that. So we're having those types of conversation. The word picnic, it was pick a nigga and hang him from a tree. that came from Paris and from France, where they would sell tickets to the picnic, and they would bring picnic bags and the children to watch black men and women hung from trees was a sport entertainment. My God, it was still legal to hang black folks from trees in Atlanta under the prior administration. That's in our generation. So we have to be aware, we have to be alert, we have to share, we have to, debunk the facts, that this is not a fact, this is this is not truthful. We've got to really do our research and make sure we're sharing these stories. Sharing the stories about McDonald's and sharing the stories about Chevy Nova and Gerber Foods. Many people don't know those stories, and those things have been out there for decades. Recently, I don't know if you've seen the video on the racist soap dispenser. How many times have you gone to get soap out the soap dispenser, and as a black person, you couldn't get soap? The exercise is done in Marriott, and the black guy and the white guy goes into Marriott to wash their hands. The black guy puts his hand under the soap dispenser. He gets no soap. He puts a piece of paper towel. White paper towel, he gets soap. The white guy puts his hand under, he gets soap. The black guy puts his hand under the soap dispenser again, he gets no soap. So at the height of COVID, when it was required to wash hands and wear masks, black and brown people could not get soap from dispensers. And when you tell people that, they go, oh my God, I just thought it was empty. Oh my God. But the reality is that this wasn't a Marriott, a Hilton, or a restaurant's issue. It was a manufacturer issue who did not control for color. It was manufacturers who did not have a diverse team or go into the diverse community and say, let me prototype this with your community to make sure I'm providing equitable opportunities for all. I tell people all the time now, listen, you don't play the lottery no more, be discriminated against. You're going to at some point, you're going to be paid off. If you Google diversity and racial conflict in the workplace, it's page after page after page after page, and millions upon millions of dollars are being paid out of people treating people with disrespect. Recently, there were 8 men on the airplane that was taken off the plane because they said they didn't smell well. They were not together. They sat differently. You had a white guy that said that he thought and just picked black people and put them off the plane. Ultimately, they were going to put them on a different plane, couldn't find a plane, put them back on the plane. How embarrassing to be taken off a plane because someone said you smell, only to return those same people looking at you. That's just horrible. Those are the types of things, if we don't uncover them, they will repeat themselves, and people have to be trained. We got to be more prescriptive about these things than we've ever been before. It's not okay. I did another exercise with a group of white people. I said, I want you to, after your white colleagues present, I want you to say to them, you articulated quite well. You speak really, really good, and see how they respond. Then I want you to lean in and touch their hair and say, can I touch your hair as you're touching it? See how they respond. They do that to us all the time, and it's supposed to be okay. I was, people think I get in a cab in New York and they'll look at me and say, hey, my brother, what part of India are you from? I'm from Detroit. Your parents migrated to Dearborn? I'm from Detroit. Now, black folks see me, see black, but some other cultures don't. I couldn't go to the airport during 9/11. I was pulled over every single time. When I traveled with my white counterparts, I said, you all go ahead because I'm going to get stopped. No, wait, go ahead, I'm going to get stopped. And 10 times out of 10, I was stopped and pulled over. So those are racial stereotypes. You look a certain way. Black women, because of facial recognition, are more likely to be pulled over in the airport than any other demographic. Because you're focused, you're serious. I got to get my kids to school. I got to get my husband off to work. I got to get on this plane. I got to do this job. You're focused. Those images come across as negative. Right? So all those things are things that will bind us and make us twice as hard. Black women are under a double bind. I'm black and I'm a woman. So those struggles that I'm going to encounter is twice as hard as anybody else. But who's going to take us through this better than anybody else? It's going to be women. Women have more resilient, they're smarter, they're caring, they're empathetic, they're smart, they're bright. I was raised by women. My father died at 13, my mom a single mother, my grandmother, I'm married to my wife, my daughter. Women have shaped my worldview, so I'm very sensitive. So I'm down with Beyonce, who rules the world? Girls. So I digress a little humor. But I think you have to look at this in a way, because we can really become so insecure about what society say who we are and what we don't do versus who we are and what we can do. We've got to celebrate our successes. And so at Hyatt, we have affinity groups, and affinity groups are designed and created by the minority for the majority to have experience, otherwise they wouldn't have. Because I know what it's like to be black 365 days out the year. I don't need anybody to educate me on that. But I do need to educate other cultures on what it means to be black, what it means to be Asian, what it means to be trans, what it means to be gay. We've got to share those stories. So it's a safe place. We call it psychological safety. So in our environment, in order to really build cultural competence, we have our senior leaders who are executive sponsors of these affinity groups opposite of the groups. So we have two white heterosexual men, straight men, who are sponsors of Hyatt Black. So they have to lean into the culture, they have to understand the culture, seek to understand, and listen to understand, and then react. That's accountability. It's beyond Taco Tuesday, beyond Fried Rice Friday, and Soul Food Sunday. It's immersing yourself into those other cultures, understanding those cultures. We believe that empathy plus action equals care. We've been just empathizing with people without any action, which doesn't demonstrate that we really care. We see that every single day in society. Enough is enough. I'm exhausted being exhausted. So I'm pretty passionate about this, and I talk fast. I hope the listeners are able to keep track with me, but I think we're at a critical moment in society. That we don't take inventory, if we don't stop and we don't do for others, right? As simple, do unto others as you want others to do unto you. Your parents told you to treat everybody with dignity and respect. It's going back to the basics, right? And then there's money to be made and money to be lost. At the end of the day, if you don't care for your consumers, they're not going to care for you. 12 corporations have shut down, restaurants have shut down. And the root of that, they didn't care for their customers. They tried to profit. I think the story around Red Lobster. During COVID, they maximized, particularly in Black and brown communities, by unlimited shrimp. They bankrupt. But they went after the money, right, and underestimated what that was going to cost them in the long term. And I think that was probably driven by multiple denominators. Let me not put that out there, but the reality is that Elaine Childs, more than 2 decades ago, talked about that by 2025, many companies will defunct because they wouldn't be able to attract or retain talent and would not be able to keep up with the market share. Look at this is probably for your time, Montgomery Wards. You look at Federal's was in Detroit, Michigan, these department stores that didn't keep up with technology and didn't do online, Amazon knocked them out the box. Right, stores that only focused on small, thin women and thin men are now longer in, I think it was Express, that only went up to a certain size, a certain body type. Didn't take into account that, the percentages of black folks and brown folks and white folks in this country, majority, I think it's more than 50% are obese. Right, but you're not understanding your consumers, you're disqualifying, you're excluding, and creating exclusionary practices, you're not going to win. So a lot here, a lot packed in this. Get the book, buy the book. I believe they're wonderful stories. I have endorsements by Ben Crump. I have endorsements by Reverend Jesse Jackson, Congressman John Lewis, C.T. Vivian. All the civil rights leaders have poured into me over the years. I tell their stories. I have their endorsements. Reverend Jesse Jackson endorsed the book as well. John Rogers, Molly Hobson. The list goes on of individuals who have made a major impact on society, right? Those are people that have been a part of my circle that has informed me, has educated me, encouraged me, inspired me, and pushed me to do a little bit more for everyone else.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Remember to make plans to join us again next week for Conversations with the Citizen, the place where real news can be heard.